Shut up and sit down.
Now leaving the contaminated area.
With only a few weeks left until the launch of Ubisoft's new game, Tom Clancy's The Division, the publisher and developer had an open beta for it this weekend. This is not the first beta, as there was a closed beta a few weeks back, but this one I assume was meant to get as much of a stress test as possible since anyone could join. And it needed it. On Thursday, during the Xbox One's 24 extra hours of access, the servers on the Xbox were exceptionally unstable. I was kicked off the game multiple times, and the one time my friend tried to join me, he was kicked off and could not reconnect. Friday, when the PC and PS4 platforms got to join in, it was a little better on the PC side, but there were still connection issues. I was only kicked off the game a few times on the PC, but was able to get back on each time. I can't say how the servers were on the PS4, as I do not own a PS4 yet. But while I did play a bit on Thursday for the open beta on the Xbox One, I also just finally got my new gaming and video editing PC right after the closed beta ended, so I wanted to see how my rig would handle The Division. And I'm happy to say it handled it beautifully. Since my new PC is better than the recommended specs, the game auto-set itself to everything on Ultra or Very High. It also supported my 144Hz monitor and was set to that as well. Overall, the game ran wonderfully, minus those connection hiccups. I never noticed a drastic drop in frame rate, and the game looked and controlled like a charm. Please note that all the footage used in this video is from the PC version. I will link my Xbox One streams in the description, as well as the full stream I did on Friday to allow you to see the differences between the versions. So first things first, the Xbox One and PS4 versions of The Division will be running at 30 frames per second, while the PC version has an unlocked frame rate, though that can be locked down if you want. If you have a PC that can handle the game running at higher settings, yes, it will look better than the console versions, but not by leaps and bounds, something that has upset some PC players. The PC version has a myriad of control binding options and also works with an Xbox One controller. Being as it's been over a decade since I really used mouse and keyboard for anything beyond Diablo 3, I eventually switched to my Xbox One Elite controller to see how it felt. While the aiming and turning isn't as fast as a mouse, it was still extremely usable in and out of combat. While the game runs nice on the Xbox One, when you see it moving at 60 frames per second or better, it really shines. It just feels super smooth compared to the console versions. Not that this means the console versions feel choppy, but the difference in frame rate is noticeable. Anyone that says frame rate isn't an issue in action-oriented or shooter games really just needs to see the difference between The Division running at 30 frames per second and running at 60 frames per second or better. In the closed beta, there were some complaints about how certain things worked, especially in the Dark Zone. Enemies in the closed beta weren't extremely challenging, and a lone player could take out a group of them in the Dark Zone without much problem. They definitely upped the difficulty of enemies in this version, though. While I was able to take out entire groups in the Dark Zone by myself, it took a lot longer than I planned and a hell of a lot more bullets. I wouldn't say the enemies are overpowered in this build, with the exception of one or two though. Overall, the difficulty felt pretty good. Since The Division uses a scaling difficulty method for enemies when facing them in solo or group, the group content also felt pretty good, but challenging. The rogue system also saw a slight overhaul, as people were complaining that if they were rogue and shot back at players shooting at them, their timers would reset to the maximum for their rogue level. This was changed so that their timers only go up if they kill a non-rogue player, but just wounding one would only freeze their timer for a short time. A second mission for the base of operations was also added that dealt with the Cleaner faction. The dynamic of this mission actually felt a good deal different from the Medical Wing mission against the Rioter faction, and I'm looking forward to see how things go with the other factions in the game. This also unlocked mods for the Sticky Bomb and the Tech Tree, which were also unavailable in the previous beta. So my overall impressions are pretty good for The Division, on both the console and the PC. While it's hard to say how things will be in the final game, if the betas are any indication, it could be a really fun loot-based shooter. However, we still don't know how crafting will really work, as it was again unavailable in the beta. We also have very little idea of how many side missions there will be in the PvE areas, and if there will be any actual missions to try and complete within the Dark Zone. Of course, the biggest issue we still have to worry about is how the Division will handle it endgame. If there isn't a lot of group content and good solo content, then the game has a very high chance of dying off very quickly after launch. If the loot system and the crafting system don't really keep people interested, then the game also faces a loss of players fairly early in its life. Ubisoft and Massive Entertainment also have to think about those players who don't buy the Season Pass right away, something I would recommend, as not every game's Season Pass is worth it to many players. We already know what the first expansion will be, and that's fine. But after Destiny screwed the pooch when it came to players who didn't buy its expansions, there are a lot of players who look at these shooter RPG hybrids with disdain. A careful balance of free and paid-for content should be maintained, and if they want those who didn't buy the Season Pass to eventually buy it, or the individual expansions, then they need to make them feel enticing, not like they're punishing players who wanted to wait and see. We also have to wait and see how the Dark Zone will play at Endgame, or, more importantly, if it is the only endgame in the Division. This is not something I would recommend, since the Dark Zone is not very friendly to solo players, and not everyone is going to have a group of friends to play with every time they boot up the game. The developers have already stated how some of the best loot is in the Dark Zone, but they need to make sure that it isn't the only place to get the best loot, or they'll lose players very fast who don't want to be the targets of roaming, griefing rogue players every time they log in. The Division looks promising. I'm going to give it a shot, but I think people should be cautious at the same time. There's a lot we don't know about this game, and what we don't know could make the game feel extremely empty very soon after launch.
You got a hell of a selection.
No matter what else is going on.
Ain't no perfect around here. You'd think they would have learned that by now.
I'll be here when you change your mind.
If I don't have it, you don't need it. No problem. I'll see you later.
Hey,
Best
don't walk away.
prices, best gear. Come and take a look.
You'll be missing
Yo,
out.
check this out.